Thank you for joining us today for our session on rapid replanning. My name is Mike Dovebish, and I'm a board member and executive committee member of Naturally Bay Area. Following up from last week's webinar on visionary leadership, we wanted to take those ideas and apply them towards a useful approach for moving your business forward. I spoke with Maura Mitchell, founder and managing partner of Brandology, shortly after the impacts of COVID-19 and the effects it was having on brands, and I thought a discussion of her rapid replanning methodology would be helpful for our community. For today's session, Maura will walk us through that process, and we will hear from our founder panelists throughout her presentation as we apply her steps in real-time case studies. Our founder panelists are Sadie Scheffer, CEO and founder of Bread Seriously, Danielle Vincent, CEO of Outlaw Soaps, and Pete Brennan, co-founder of Sonar Foods. Each founder will introduce themselves, and Maura will follow up and present her rapid replan with interactions from the founders, which will then be followed by Q&A from the audience. Please use the chat function or Q&A in Zoom for any questions. Naturally Bay Area was founded in 2018 as a nonprofit, and we were the first affiliate of Naturally Network. Naturally Network and its affiliates share in the same vision of serving those who wish to create a more conscious and regenerative economy and culture through the power of commerce. We hold education and networking events throughout the year and plan to continue to hold online events for the foreseeable future. But we look forward to holding in-person events this fall. We will be announcing our upcoming events shortly, and you can find updated information about us and our events at naturallybayarea.org. Our community is made up of 30 board members and advisors, 60 community partners, and over 500 active members. I want to thank our extensive board who regularly contribute to the success of our mission. And thank you to all of our sponsors. They are an important part of our organization, and we thank them for their continued support. We start today's session with an introduction from each founder, and we'll kick that off with Sadie Scheffer, CEO and founder of Bread Seriously.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Sadie Scheffer. So I run Bread Seriously, which is a gluten-free and vegan sourdough bread company based in Berkeley. And I think we've been Naturally members since the beginning here. So we sell our products, we make a perishable product, we do our own manufacturing and our own distribution. And that's been really interesting in this climate because the first place we went to when the shelter in place started is how do we maintain our operations? How do we maintain the safety of our employees? We did not go straight to what does our brand need to do to win? And we've found that we are like our brand is still winning, I think, because we've centered ourselves in a very values aligned approach to maintaining our safety, maintaining our mission without sacrificing our values. And that seems to be really resonating with our core customer. Our business has by and large migrated to direct to consumer. That's about half of our business now, which used to be a quarter before March. And we're just getting like an outpouring of support right now, which feels amazing. Support with like nice little notes, but also support with purchases, which was sort of unexpected. So I'm excited to work through this framework today, and I'm going to be talking about one of the more strategic challenges that we're facing, which is our new product strategy. So we had a couple SKUs we were planning to launch in Q4 this year. We scrapped those and replaced them with something completely different. So I'll be talking about that later today. Thanks all for being here.
Hey everybody, I'm Pete Brennan. I am the co-founder of Sonar Foods. We're an organic grain-free tortilla chip that is made from garbanzo beans, cassava, hemp, chia, and flax. So nutrient-dense ingredients, delivering 3 grams of protein, 5 grams of fiber, 0 sugars, and only 8 grams of net carbs. So some healthy snacks while we're in this downtime, some good stuff to be able to have on hand. and with a powerful mission, one that really was the impetus for launching our entire brand, which was to nourish a nation of dreamers, to be able to support our communities and to be able to support the Latino Community Foundation in its efforts to drive more creative, more vital activities within the community so that it all could thrive. And one of the ways that we built our company was in retail, right? And we went after new distribution within natural organic in a pretty big way. We started in independents, and most recently, as of about January, we were launching in Sprouts and Whole Foods and Lassen's and AJ's. I mean, a number of independent or small chains. And so, about 30 days after launch, we all find ourselves in the situation that we're in today. And so that causes us, like so many of you out there, to have to rethink the way in which we're building relationships, a lot of which had been done in store, one-on-ones with our customers, one-on-ones with our consumers, right? Offering us the opportunity to be able to taste and share our product, face to face, and to be able to sample. And those options aren't available to us right now. And as we see it, probably for at least the short to medium term. So a lot of the work that we're doing to be able to replan on a rapid basis is to think about our channel strategy, think about the way that that allows us to be able to build relationships with our brand. What might have been a 90% retail to 10% online focus is starting to shift, needing to be able to make some of those relationships online. And when I was offered the opportunity to be able to talk today and to be able to learn from somebody like Maura and also from Sadie and Danielle and getting the opportunity to listen to how they're approaching their businesses, that was huge for us, because that's the position we find ourselves in, is trying to take in all of the ideas, all of the thoughts, and then new approaches to the way in which we're going to continue to build our brand as we move forward. So thanks, and look forward to talking more about our channel shift and the way in which we'll continue to build.
Hi, my name is Danielle Vincent. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Outlaw Soaps. We make personal care that's evocative and inspires the best in people. We were in California, and we moved from Grass Valley, California to Sparks, Nevada in January because of the rolling power outages in Gold Country. And those hit us during our peak production season of fall. So Christmas was a real struggle, trying to meet all the orders. We ran out of product. It was very, very rough. And so we bit the bullet and decided to move to the big city to have a more dependable power source, which of course, then all of a sudden, as soon as we got organized, there was a pandemic. And I was just saying to Maura, nobody has a global pandemic tab on their business plan. So this has been a real shift, but thankfully we are primarily direct to consumer. We sell through liveoutlaw.com and Amazon, as well as some strategic wholesale partners like Whole Foods. And our shift, I spent most of March in a total self-pitying panic. I'll just be completely honest. And then I was like, this is our time. We are the people. We sell soap in a time when it's a global pandemic, and the best thing to combat this is hand washing. Like, this is our time. We show up and we do direct to consumers, so people can not feel like they have to hoard because we have subscriptions. They can depend on our delivery. We know how to wash our hands, so we know how to protect ourselves against this virus. We all wear masks at work. We're all very hygiene conscious people in a time when hygiene is so desperately needed. And we also have this amazing relationship with our customers like Sadie. The notes, the love, the relationships that we've been building in this time have been phenomenally rich and deep, and people just drop us notes saying, hey, I just want to make sure you're doing okay, which I just am blown away by the fact that for a soap company, like strangers are writing asking us how we're doing, and that has been so wonderful. And so when Amazon's, and I'll just speak about the challenges, when Amazon's deprioritized all the non-essentials, cologne, which had been a huge seller before, fell off of a cliff. Already we were having inventory challenges because we just moved, and so our production was crippled but from the move. And then all of a sudden, one of our major sales channels went away. And so we really struggled with that. But in the beginning of April, I really focused on repivoting and, pivoting our whole thing towards subscriptions, towards encouraging our existing customers who've been with us for a long time, and our direct to consumer, really doubling down on that, focusing on the dropping cost of acquisition on Facebook to advertise directly and really position ourselves for success. It's been hard. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited to have this opportunity to come in here, because planning for the future is terrifying right now. Like, I don't know how things are going to go, and I don't know when things are going to let up, and nobody does, and we have no crystal balls. So I'm hoping that Maura will know the future. Thank you for having us here.
Not a lot of pressure at all.
No.
That's great. Okay, Maura, I think we're ready for you and your presentation.
Okay, can you guys all see the screen there? Great. So I'm going to take you through a rapid replanning method to move from surviving to thriving in these crazy, crazy times. So I'm thrilled to be here with you guys, and I only wish I could actually see you in person. It's a little bit odd to be talking to a camera and a microphone sitting on my desk. But I am the managing partner for Andology, and we're a management and marketing firm that specializes in powerful, practical, profitable growth plans. And we focus virtually all our work on the natural products industry. And we work with really big companies, and we also work with 1- and 2-person startups. And additionally, we work with some key retailers as well. So over the past 6 weeks, it feels like we've all just been hit with this rapid fire barrage of changes and emergencies. And everyone's been running around trying to reforecast cash flow and apply for SBA loans and figure out why their supply chain isn't working, and dealing with, hundreds of other fires like you've just heard from the 3 founders. And now that the kind of big wave of chaos is past, or at least the first wave of chaos is past, we believe that companies that succeed best in the long term are going to be the ones that take a step back and do some planning, as opposed to continuing to react just as things come up and as changes occur. So we've worked with several clients over the past couple of weeks, and we've put together what we're calling a rapid replanning process that helps you chart a brand path to success over the coming 12 months. And I know the notion of planning can strike terror in people's hearts as, oh, it's super time consuming and we don't have time to plan. We hardly have time to deal with our daily crises. But that's part of why we structured the plan to be a very simple 5-step process. And we just completed one of these rapid replans with a client last week. And it was literally 10 days from when we kicked off the process to where they presented their replan to their board. So we really mean it to be rapid, but we also mean it to be very effective, so that you can move from kind of the survival reaction mode to a thriving mode in the future. So I'm going to take you through a top line of the 5 steps in the rapid replan process, and then I'll dive more deeply into each of those. So the first step is to create scenarios for how your category is going to look in 12 months. And at this point, we're looking at 12 months as really being the long term. Then second, we want to determine how your brand is going to win in each scenario. How do you need to show up? What do you need to do? And what do you need to be in each scenario? And identify the commonalities across those. Third is to assess what you need to start and stop doing to get to that winning position in 12 months. And you'll hear this multiple times from me today, but I actually think what you stop doing is as important, or maybe even more important than what you stop doing. I think we're all better at starting things than stopping things. And this is a time where we're going to need to stop some things. Next, we're going to talk about identifying forks in the road and signposts. And those are things that'll help us figure out our timelines and figure out where we are in our progress. And then finally, the fifth step in the process is to review progress and your dashboard weekly. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to those. So diving into step one, everything needs to start with creating category scenarios. And we believe that you need to have 2 and maybe even 3 scenarios of what you think your category will look like in the future. Because the truth is, none of us have any idea what's going to happen. And while it's really comforting as humans to think we do, it's much more practical from a brand standpoint to kind of give into the fact that we don't know and we need to plan for a variety of different options. What we do is look at kind of outcomes and then set up a couple scenarios. Maybe it's, you know, a best case and a worst case scenario, or maybe it's the pessimistic, the average, and the really optimistic scenario. But to have those scenarios and for each of them to go through 12 months from now, what are your consumers, your channels, your customers, and your competitors doing? And part of your scenario planning should be at a macro, big picture level where you're thinking about the economy and you're thinking about the food industry in total. But so much of what's happening right now is very category specific, as Danielle mentioned, where she's got one category that's thriving and one category that's fallen off a cliff. But it's actually really important that you do this with it's really tempting as you start to create scenarios to merge them all into one. And I watch groups do this all the time. They start out with, you know, the best case and the worst case scenario, and all of a sudden they say, well, actually, we're pretty certain it's going to end up right in the middle. And given how much things are changing right now, that's really dangerous. We really need to have scenarios that represent some different perspectives so that we can think that through, and so that we can keep in mind that we need to be nimble, we need to be responsive, and we need to be kind of tracking changes to see how the world evolves, because there isn't a way at this point in time to really project where we're going to be in 12 months. So, Danielle, I think you had a question about how we plan around category scenarios.
Yeah, so we've been thinking a lot about this because a lot of it has to do with where the industry is. Are people going to continue to go to grocery stores? Is the direct-to-consumer or grocery delivery going to be something that is growing, or is it going to be something that's retreating? And how can we, you know, with Amazon's, you know, we always assumed that Amazon was going to be a rock solid channel for us. And as it kind of falters, what does that look like next year? What does that look like over the next 12 months? Are they going to recover? What's Christmas look like for that? Because Christmas is such a huge part of our annual sales. So I guess that to me is the question, like, how can we build scenarios around that type of uncertainty, because we really don't know like what's going to happen with these things.
And that's exactly what the scenarios are designed to address. So in your case, you would say, I'm going to have one scenario where I assume that from a channel perspective that e-commerce has become a much more dominant channel than it is right now, and bricks and mortar is less powerful. And from a customer perspective, I'm going to assume that our categories still aren't prioritized on Amazon, and we aren't getting the kind of delivery or the fulfillment that we need. And you would set that up as one of your scenarios, and your other scenario might be bricks and mortar, the percent difference between bricks and mortar and e-commerce, the way your category is divided, it returns to normal, and Amazon completely returns to normal. And so then you've got two completely different worldviews you're planning for. And maybe you look at an in-between one, which is that Amazon gets it together and e-commerce is a bigger portion of overall channel sales. But you actually look at those as three different potential outcomes, and you don't try and say, well, we're going to pick one of those. You look at all three and you say, within those possibilities of all three, what should we be doing so that we're best positioned in 12 months?
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, so once you have your scenarios, then you go into step 2, which is determining how is your brand going to win. And what we want to look at is really the end point of what are the attributes and what are the approaches and how are you showing up in market so that you win. And we tend to look across 7 factors, although there could be more in your business. But we look from a channel, product, sales, marketing, ops, finance, and HR perspective. And for each of those perspectives, we say in scenario 1, and let's take this back to Danielle's scenario, let's say that's the scenario where e-commerce is a bigger percentage of the category, but Amazon is still deprioritizing the category. You know, what are you going to do about channels? What are you going to do about your products? What are you going to do about your sales? And you walk through all of those attributes for that scenario. And then you look at those same attributes in the scenario where you say the other extreme, the mix of channels goes back to what it was 6 months ago, and Amazon is functioning really smoothly. And you look through and you say, okay, well, what does that mean for channel, product, sales, and on and on? And then you do 2 things. One is you look at those 2, here's how I want to show up in the future lists, and you look for the commonalities, because those are the things that no matter what happens in the future, you want to make sure you are doing in 12 months. And the second thing you look for is what I call, game over factors. We just worked with a company where 35% of their sales are international sales. And one of their future scenarios assumes that because COVID ping-pongs around the globe for the next 12 months from now, their international sales will not be robust. One of their scenarios assumes it will be robust, but because 35% of sales is such an important chunk of their business, they have identified that the way they need to show up, if those sales are blocked by supply chain, they have to work on that even though it might or might not happen. So you're really looking at 2 things. What are the commonalities of things you need to work towards regardless of scenario? And what are the things that occur in one scenario that are so critically important that you have to work towards that even if it might or might not happen? And that's what you focus on in step 2.
Got a couple questions here in step 2. So let's say you have a new product that you're working on that you are very excited about, asking for a friend here, and you are inclined to work backward to make sure that that new product idea makes you win in all of your scenarios. What are some methods you have to check that behavior?
So if I was focusing right now on determining new products, I would be very, very focused on consumer and on channel. And those would be the 2 things that I would be using to inform what I do. And I would be looking at not kind of underlying, just the underlying long-term trends from consumers, but I would be looking at what can you learn week to week. And everybody and their brother has a COVID research report they're publishing, and I read a whole ton of them. There's a couple of really good ones that are tracking, you know, very specific consumer sentiment about how consumers are feeling about what they're going to eat, what they're going to spend, those kinds of things. So I would start there and say, what are consumers really focused on, and particularly what are new things, and do I think they're going to last? And then the second thing I would look at is channels, because what new products are going to succeed is going to be completely driven by what your scenarios are of what the different options are for your channel mix in the future.
Great. And then one more question that's a little more general here. If you've mapped this out and you've found your common tactics, and those will help you win in the 12-month timeline, but they're like untenable right now in the short term, how do you balance that long-term view with short-term survival?
So what I would do there is, when we get to the step where we talk about timing, I would figure out how to time those tactics so that you can work towards getting them ready for when it's market appropriate, and also when it's, you know, financially or operationally tenable. So, you know, there may be things that you say, excuse me, we need to do in a year, but we can't start them for 6 months because of cash flow or because of this or because of that. I think we need to be flexible in terms of the way we work and say, you know, there's a nice methodical way to get things done, and then there's a pandemic way to get things done. And during pandemics, we may have to be really different about how we get things done so that we can do them in that window when they're tenable and when they'll have an impact.
Mara, I'm going to interject here. I'm already starting to get questions. I'm just going to ask this one because it's relevant to the point we're at now. Do you have any thoughts top of mind on any meaningful trend reports that that the audience might look for in their approach to this?
So let me start with the usual disclaimer. I'm not affiliated with them. They don't pay me any money. But I have really been looking forward to every week the report that comes out from AccuPoll. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with them. They're a consumer research service, and they have been doing a really nice report about what consumers are thinking week by week. And it's much more granular and much more kind of day-to-day thinking. And I found that, you know, to be really, really useful. Beyond that, you know, I'm happy to follow up with whoever and send an email, but there's also some futurists are starting to weigh in on how they think that the pandemic is going to change the trajectory of future trends. And I've got a couple of those reports that are, you know, free circulating in the public domain. And finally, the thing that I've seen over and over again that I believe is one of the biggest changes to trends that will be driven by the pandemic is that everything that was on a trajectory is going to speed up. So the things that were on their way up are just going to take off, and the things that were on their way down are going to go down that much further. So that would be another perspective I'd add to just overall trend thinking.
Great.
Okay, so after you've identified how your brand wins and what the commonalities are and what kind of the game over things are that you need to focus on, then we move on to step 3, which is to identify what to start doing and what to stop doing. And I think we're all pretty good, and especially, you know, those of you with us today who are entrepreneurs, we're all really good at starting to do things. And we can go through that list that we created of how we want to show up and what we want to be, and identify, here are all the things we need to start doing to be there. I think what we're less good at is figuring out what to stop doing. And oftentimes things get derailed because we try and keep doing the things we've always done as well as pick up these new activities. So one of the tools that we use with our clients is what we call the to-don't list. And the to-don't list is what the leadership team sits down and jointly agrees are things that we're not going to do in the future. And we actually keep them on a list so that we can go back and remind people that we agreed we weren't going to do those things. And with the situation we're in now, some of the to-don'ts are easy to stop because business has fallen off a cliff or a supplier isn't working for us anymore or whatever. But some of the to-don'ts are going to be really hard things for us to have to think through. We're going to have new products that we love that we realize that we can't really launch. We're going to have, you know, a way of going to market, and Pete was talking about how they connect with their consumers and connect with their customers. And we're going to not want to stop doing that. We're going to keep trying to figure out how can we make that work. So as we go through figuring how to get from here to where we want to be, we need to focus on the new to-dos, but as important, we need to focus on what are we going to stop doing, even though it may be things that we love to do.
Maura, I've got a question on that as it relates to a hard stop versus a shift in the allocation of resources. So for instance, you just related the story of shifting channels, right? And wanting to ensure that relationships that we have built over the past year of our launch with our customers and with our consumers, and the way that we've been able to thrive in that environment isn't lost. At the same time, we need to start down the path of building a much stronger relationship online and with digital resources available to us. And so how do you counsel brands and companies to think about, you know, modulating in that type of scenario, making sure that you're not losing what you built, but at the same time, you're allocating appropriately?
So I think that is very much of a balancing act to figure out how to do that. What I would say is you don't want to end up doing 50 things because you tried to take things and not get rid of them. So I think you need to get back to a manageable number of to-dos and realize a couple things. One is that probably your goodwill will last longer than you think it will, even if it gets modest to no attention. And the second thing is every time you're spending time on keeping something going, you're not spending time on something new. And I think I would think about my allocation of time in the scenario you just brought up based on what are the future scenarios I'm looking at. So if you've done your two scenarios, if one of them isn't the mix of retail and e-commerce will return to where it was 6 months ago, then you probably would have already been dialing down some of the work you're doing with bricks and mortar or some of the work you're doing face-to-face with consumers. So I would make that change with those scenarios in mind and making the hard choice of, you know, anytime you spend keeping one thing going, you're not starting the new thing. Now that said, I don't think personally in your example, that's a black and white choice. I wouldn't say, oh, we've, you know, met all these people at events, we've got this email, we've got this social following, and we're just going to stop doing that because now we're going in a different direction. But I would say, how do we dial that down and put it on cruise control with minimal effort while we focus on these other things?
Fair. Thank you.
Okay, so then step 4, and this ties back a little bit to some things that Danielle and Sadie were talking about. Step 4 is to identify your forks in the road and your signposts. And what we call forks in the road are times when there's an external event that is an inflection point in where you'll go in the future. And forks in the road are things and times when you want to be ready to act. So for instance, for companies who have a big food service business, when food service sit down reopens the way it has been in, you know, back in 2019, that's a big fork in the road that you want to be ready on day one when food service is open at full seating capacity to do something. The second thing is what we call signposts. And those are external metrics that we monitor over time that help us better understand the future and help us decide which of our scenarios is more likely. Should we modify our scenarios? How do we feel about our plans? And signposts are things like the unemployment rate, consumer sentiment, and they can be category specific as well. But they're things that we monitor that help us start to get a firmer view of what the future is going to look like. So I'm going to dive into both of these a little more detail. So for forks in the road, you really want to use those to determine when you're going to act and how you're going to act to show up the way you want to show up. So for instance, the food service one is an easy one to talk about. If there's a fork in the road that's relevant to you around when food service sit down opens, then based on that, you develop your timeline and your work plan around here's what we want to be ready to do day one when food service opens. The same thing, Fulfill by Amazon isn't accepting new SKUs right now. If people are going to change their e-commerce business and they're going to do it in a way that involves Amazon, when that channel opens up, FBA again, there's going to be a whole series of things that you want to be ready to do there. And this is how we'd establish the timelines for your tactics and your strategies to get you from today to where you want to be in 12 months, with the idea being that you time everything against those forks in the road. And Sadie, this ties a little bit back to your question about, well, what about there's something I want to do that I can't yet do? You would be starting at a fork in the road of here's when I want to have that available. And then you would be sort of compressed by, on the other side, here's when, let's say it's financing. Here's when I'll have the financing to be able to start that. And you basically have established what your timeline is. And it's not going to be a traditional timeline, and it's probably not going to be a comfortable timeline, but that's the time you have between when you're financially able to do it and when the fork in the road where you need to be ready for happens. Yeah, and you plan your plans for everything.
Thanks for clarifying that. I'm guessing that PPP funding is going to be a fork on most people's charts here.
Exactly. And so then the second part of this is looking at signposts. And signposts are those metrics and measures that are external that you track over time that help you decide which of your scenarios is more likely. Should you be doing something different than you're doing? Is your signpost coming up, or is your fork in the road coming up sooner than you thought your fork in the road is coming up? But for instance, it's things like tracking unemployment to figure out, what's happening and when should you be getting that value pack on the market. If unemployment, goes up like a rock and up like a rocket and starts to come down really fast, maybe you say, wait a second, that value pack program we were going to do, maybe we don't need to do that. On the other hand, if it goes up and it plateaus and it's going across, then maybe you say, wow, we need to do that even sooner. People are going to be more price sensitive, they're going to be more focused. So signposts are really things to monitor that help you decide the speed of your actions, the timing of your actions, and potentially even whether or not you should continue down a path towards a specific outcome. So then the final step in our process is not very sexy, but it's incredibly important, which is to review your progress. And we recommend that you review your progress weekly because things are changing so rapidly that you need to be checking in weekly. Now, we think you should check in weekly, but only to think about fine tuning. What you don't want to do is check in every week and, turn left and then turn right and then turn left and then turn right. So you need to keep track of what's happening with your signposts, what's happening in your business, and talk about small adjustments, but not overreact to it. So we have our clients identify the internal metrics that are going to help you figure out if you're on the right path. So what are those things that are happening inside your business You know, it could be sales, gross margins, could be supply reliability, all kinds of other things. But what are those things that help you say, is the business moving in the direction, at the speed we want it to be, in the way we want it to be? And you're also going to want to track things that are just completion oriented. Did you get XYZ done at the time you needed to? And if you overlay this with your signposts, then you start to get a picture of what's happening externally that influences the business and what's happening within the business and what that means you should continue to fine tune. So final recap of the 5 steps. You start by creating your 2 to 3 scenarios for how your category will look in 12 months. You start at a macro level and look at the food industry, but you pretty quickly get into your specific category. You look at consumers, channels, customers, and competitors. Then you look at how your brand wins in every step in each scenario, and you look at that across the 7 factors, and you identify what are the commonalities of how you show up, who you are, what you do across those scenarios. And you also look for the game over factors. What are the things that happen that you need to do in one scenario that are so important that you have to execute against them, even if they're not present in all scenarios? Then the third step is you determine your start and stop doing, and you really focus on your stop doing. And as Pete said, and his question revealed, that's a really hard thing to do. And it's not necessarily black and white, but we really have to think about how are we going to allocate those very precious resources we have, both money and maybe even more importantly now, people's time, to stay focused on where we want to go. We're going to look for our forks in the road, which are the inflection points that we need to be ready for. And we're going to look at signposts that help us figure out where are we, how fast are things going, what's turning out the way we thought it would, what's not. And we're going to arrange our timelines and our work plans around that. And then finally, we're going to review our progress in our dashboard weekly. We're going to fine tune as we learn things, but we're not going to knee-jerk overreact. So now I'd like to open it up, and Mike, I think Mike is fielding audience questions, but would love to answer your questions.
Yeah, and I think we might have a few more from our panelists too. So would you mind putting back your slide that you just had? I think slide 13. Great. That's great. So one question I had, so this was early on. I'm looking at the first step, and I guess this would apply to all steps, but this is a big, these are obviously unprecedented times, and then founders, CEOs, they're engaged, they need to go through this process. How do they, I assume you are suggesting that they should maybe seek out someone, maybe an advisor that they've been working with, or maybe their investors, to help them with this, because this is pretty, it's for some of them it's make or break. So how should they go about figuring out who should help them craft this or refine it?
So I believe planning in general, and specifically this type of planning, you want to do it in a relatively small group, because once you get 12 people in the room, nothing happens rapidly. And the second thing is, this is kind of deep soul-bearing work at this point in time, because we're really talking about things that could happen to our companies that could be devastatingly horrible or could be wonderfully positive. But we have to be able to do that from a place of being vulnerable and talking about what we're really worried about, what might be that bad possible scenario. So I would counsel people to get together the key leadership in their company, a very small group. And then if you want to work with someone externally, you want it to be somebody who you trust and you're comfortable with the level of kind of complete honesty and soul bearing that you need to do to talk about those scenarios. So absolutely, an investor would be fabulous.
Current
A
investor.
trusted business partner. A current investor, a trusted business partner. But what I would be worried about is I wouldn't set out to do this process with someone who I didn't want to see, kind of how the sausage is made. If I wouldn't want to do this where I'm going, well, gosh, this is really a worry, or this is really a potential scenario, but I don't want to say that because I know if I say that in front of this investor, then they're going to do this other thing. This is too critical a time and too important a process to be self-editing during it because of those kinds of pressures.
Yeah, and to dovetail off that a little bit, I get a lot of questions about companies and investors that they're talking with now and asking, how do I make my business look more attractive to them? And, I don't know if that's the right process that they should be going about this. I think they need to put that aside and go through this without someone that's not intimate with the company, and go through this process first. And then if it makes sense for that investor to come in, great. But I don't know if this is such a critical time, I don't know if they should be playing too hard to a potential investor.
So my view on this, and this comes up in a lot of different plans we do, not just during pandemics, which is a new one for us, is the way to make your company look attractive to an investor is to be an attractive company. So I would start with how do you plan to build that company that will thrive in 12 months? And once you figure that out, then you don't have to position it and make it look attractive to an investor. It is attractive to an investor. So I would, and I know this is easy to say when, I'm not in your shoes in terms of struggling for financing, but I would put what are the investors going to think to the side. And I would say, I want to do a replan to figure out how I can build the best possible company in 12 months. And I would do that. And then I would say, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Now, how do I make the presentation to the investor?
And as we've been talking about this, I'm getting some questions about investors. So it's timely. And I think they'll appreciate that. They can go to them and say, I've gone through this process. This is what we're going to look like. And if you're interested, let's continue the conversation.
Right. Yeah, it always seems to unravel when people spend a lot of time figuring out how to position something, that's really a navel orange and trying to position it to look like a mandarin. It's like that shows up. So just lean into what you are, figure out what you can best be, and then go out to investors as that. That's going to turn out better.
And more as a reminder, I mean, you stated, and having been through some scenario planning like this in the past with bigger companies, this just last week, it was what, a 10-day process it took of probably full-on attention put to this. So that idea of bearing your soul and not shining on, very real, right?
Yeah, and when we did it over 10 days, it was a very small group. It was myself and one other person. It was for a smaller company. It was myself and one other person who did the core work. And then we involved 3 other people at critical stages as we went through it. So, I know time is the most precious commodity right now for everybody. It wasn't 5 people working for 10 days at 15 hours a day. There was 2 of us working intently and a couple other people parachuting in.
I've got a question. I'm curious, looking at this framework, what different definitions of winning you've seen with past clients?
And so that is a great question, because I think each of us has to figure out what winning means to us. I think at the most basic, I've seen some clients who are going through this process just to survive. They're basically saying it will be a win if we can still be in business a year from now. I've talked to other clients who have much loftier goals in terms of, we want to make sure we're hitting the same sales and EBITDA numbers that we were planning to hit, even though this has changed. So I think it's internal to each company what winning means to you.
I have a question about the final step. I have a tendency to want to throw out plans and restart from the very beginning. Every time something changes, I'm like, okay, wait, no. This was a stupid plan. Now I have to change plans. How often do you think we should, obviously, you know, review the progress and dashboard weekly, fine tune, but do not overreact? When I read do not overreact, I was like, so is there a point, what trigger points do you set for like, okay, now we have to reevaluate where we are? Like, do you recommend doing this process every quarter, or, and then at the end of the whole thing, like, let's say we make it 12 months, I mean, which we're going to obviously, but you get to the end of 12 months, you look back and you say, what road did I take, and what does that mean for the future? Like, at what point do you look back and go, well, we did it, you know? So
yeah, now what's next? Yeah. So I would say I would change less rather than more as I check in once a week, unless something is really different in terms of a fork in the road, a signpost, or your internal metrics. So, you know, if, and I'm just making up things that we all dream about in the middle of the night, if, you know, next month they figure out a treatment for COVID that reduces the lethality of it dramatically, then we're going to need to replan. You know, that's going to be something big enough. That's a fork in the road that's moved from, you know, 18 months out to a month out. That's going to cause a replan. So it would take something of that magnitude and that certainty for me to say, okay, scratch it all and start again. It's much more likely that you're going to be dealing with changes that are like, you know, gee, we thought sit-down food service would be open at full capacity in October. Now it looks like maybe it's November. Okay, well, what little changes do we make? You know, oh, we thought that Amazon would be back to shipping our products on 2-day Prime in July, but now they're saying they don't know when. What changes do we make? I would be really leery of knee-jerking to any specific change unless it was a huge move of a fork in the road or a signpost. And then in terms of, you know, let's say it's 12 months from now, we're all thriving, I would say you absolutely do look back and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, but that's time to then plan for your next 12 months. And even, you know, even if we're out of the situation we're in currently, it's still a great idea to have that 12-month plan in place to say, here's what we're going to be doing over the coming year.
cool, thanks.
Well, I have a question. We are talking about obviously this current situation with COVID. Is there something more macro that companies should be sort of thinking about? And it's not I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but is there learnings from this more broadly that companies should start to think about? What that is, I don't know. And maybe that's some of these research or expert opinions about how we consume and what we're consuming. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, sort of, you know, beyond COVID, and how do we think about what's happened and what could happen again?
So I think the thing that's interesting is when you start to look back over the past however many decades, about once a decade, we have something happen that was never supposed to happen, never happened before, and hopefully will never happen again. You know, so now we've got COVID. Prior to this, we had the housing market meltdown. Prior to that, you had the dot-com crash, you know, and you can just go back, and about every 10 years, some black swan event happens that impacts business. And almost by definition, you don't know what the next one is going to be. But I think what we do know is there will be a next one. So I think there's two lessons for us to think about. One is to just plan that there are going to be unexpected shocks to the system once a decade or more frequently, and they're going to be new and different and things we can't even fathom. So just kind of emotionally steel ourselves for that. And then the second thing is, I think that knowledge that there are going to be ongoing shocks is a real motivator for us to say, how do you remain agile? How do you make sure that your foundation is solid, but you're really able to react quickly? What do you have in place? How do you think about that? How do you plan so that 10 years from now, when we have the next webinar, because the next big event has happened, we're able to deal with it differently. And Mike, I think I told you this story, but we live in Santa Barbara, and we spent tons of time before we bought our house making sure we weren't in the fire zone. And we bought this house, and then of course, right after we moved here, they moved the fire zone line, and of course, we're in the fire zone. And Santa Barbara ends up with wildfires several times a year. And the first time we had to evacuate our house, it was like a clown factory. I mean, I can't even tell you how completely a mess it was. And then after that, we said to ourselves, you know what, it's probably likely that we're going to have to evacuate under different circumstances for different reasons, because then we had the floods down here at different times. And we set up a whole system for how do you deal with if we had to evacuate for any reason, or if our house burned down or got washed away. And that has entirely changed the way we deal with anything that happens here. And unfortunately, Santa Barbara does have a lot of things happen. And I think there's a parallel there for businesses to say, we don't know what the next business disaster that's equivalent to the Santa Barbara fires is going to be, but what do we get in place so that we're ready to be nimble and react and survive through it?
Definitely.
Mike, I think one of the questions that you also asked was around, bigger macro issues that we could see coming out of this situation and this crisis. And I do think that one of the things that this process, Maura, that you've outlined provides is the ability to have some trust in your own decision making. And I think one of the biggest issues that we're going to face as everybody, right, as a society, is going to be trust, right? So, and in crisis, it's difficult to be able to make decisions and to feel that they're informed. And I think that this process helps to do that. I think one of the things that we need to continue to watch is how do consumers, how do customers, how does our entire value chain need to be able to have trust, right? What's it going to take for us to continue to maintain that? So I do think that's going to continue. I think it's going to be a major issue. I think that, we need to all ensure that we're really doing our best to stick to our values and stick to our guns as we're doing this, but make sure that we're making some informed decisions along the way.
And I want to.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I want to add, I was on a webinar or a Zoom call, however we refer to these things, webinar, Zoom call, a few weeks ago on supplements and the growth, skyrocketing not skyrocketing, but still very strong. And I think this into health and wellness does well, generally does well, even through downturns and these black swan events. I think there's a lot of companies that have to adjust really quickly, but I think what's sort of nice to know is that this industry tends to fare better than most. So that's a good thing, I think, that we should all think about.
So if anyone wants the slides from what I presented today, they're on the front page of Brandology's website with a free download. It's brandology.com, and you'll see them kind of in the lower third of the front page. So feel free to go there and and download them and study them.
Awesome.
Okay, if you all could stay on just for a couple minutes, I'm gonna, there's a couple questions from the audience I'd like to ask of you. Let's see, any advice for people who have pushed back their launch? What can be done different to set up to succeed? And can we still launch a new product, brand, company? So product launch right now, or a new SKU. What's your thoughts on
Sadie.
that? Right?
Do you want me to take that, Mike, or Pete? Were you going to answer that?
Oh, I was saying that's a Sadie sandbox.
Well, so we're in the very, we're a scrappy team over here. So our product development is also very scrappy. It's happening in my home kitchen. So, you know, I say we re-strategized our product launches, but we didn't have recipes for those product launches when we dumped them. So it's, you know, we're pretty nimble on the product development side. What we're betting on is the making sourdough at home, DIY, flour shortage side of the situation right now. So we're, instead of making a baked loaf of bread, we're making a mix, which has added operational advantages of if we have to temporarily shut down, if we're somehow not considered essential anymore, or if we decide to voluntarily shut down, we have a product that isn't perishable, that we can keep sending out the door. So that was our strategic thought behind the product launch. I don't know if that even answered this question, but that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, and you know, from our perspective and big picture, you know, I think a lot of companies probably had new products planned into their pipeline, may have already been in discussions if they can't produce on their own with co-manufacturers. And you know, just in general, there are resources throughout the system that are shifting, right? And so really, if you're considering this and you're considering new product development, just check with the resources that would have been required to make it happen. See if those are still going to be available to you now or in the coming months. Check to see if all of the ingredients and supplies and everything like that are still going to be available to you. And I think that's going to be important. But it's still possible for sure. I'm seeing new product launches all the time. I just think that Maura brought up a really good point on the two major factors are consumer and channel. And are those two, is there high enough demand? If so, can you fill it, right? Because it's necessary. And then two, can the channel burden it? And can you deliver on, you know, what you're going to plan that new product to be? So I think those are two great questions to ask.
I'd like to build on that, on what both of you, Pete and Sadie, said. I think that you have to, at least one of the things, we had to cancel a product launch that was set for last month with Whole Foods. And instead, we decided to launch a bunch of new D2C products, different subscriptions, and lower cost soap options, so that we could address the market, solve the problems that were coming up. So I think that that's one of the things that you have to look at in terms of a product launch. Is this solving an immediate need? Does this have to launch now? Or are our resources and time best spent in some other arena that more directly addresses the problem? So
100%.
Right. I'm going to ask another question here. For newer brands with limited data and history, are there any adjustments to the process?
So I never believe in cookie cutter processes where everybody just takes them and runs off and does it. So I do think everybody has to look at the process and says what works best for us versus what works best for somebody else. That said, I think the actual steps are still really relevant when you think about, you know, projecting scenarios for your category. That should be, for the most part, information that is gathered that isn't impacted by what brand you are. It's around the category. What you stop and start doing, you know, should tie into that. So I feel like you might make some changes just for each brand because each brand has its own personality, its own style, its own set of challenges. But I don't think not having a lot of your own data should hold you back from going through kind of the general framework of the process.
I do think as one of the smaller brands that are even on this panel, you know, and having worked at really big companies on really big brands, there are major differences in terms of, you know, what you have available to you. And so the magnitude of shift in those scenarios that you build out, what you have available in one scenario that another brand or company might not, or that you have that another company has, are going to be very different. And so your considerations need to be different. But the steps in the process, I think, are universal. And so just making sure that you're just right sizing it to who you are and what you have available to you, and the likelihood of you getting those resources as a small company or as a small brand, whether it's data, anything else, are going to be really different. So just make sure you're working with what you got, and I think that's probably the best approach.
Great. Well, I think that's it. Do we have any other questions from the panel?
There's just one over here in the Q&A about how to decide whether to even enter a channel.
Oh, okay. Oh, I missed that one. Yes. So, okay. This person is asking if they should even enter direct to consumer. Obviously, they're looking at margins, cash needs, operations, but anything beyond that. And not sure what a good metric for success would be if they did launch, since they are not familiar with this channel. So there's obviously a lot of talk and interest and demand for direct to consumer, but this person and their company, it sounds like there's a little hesitation here, and sounds like they don't have a lot of experience with this channel, and that's where all the focus is right now. So how would you address this?
So I think, you know, I would start again with consumers and say, why do you think it would or wouldn't work to go direct to consumer with whatever you're selling? So what's the consumer driver? What's the consumer need? What happens with other similar things that are sold direct to consumer? And I don't know if you're thinking direct to consumer as a subscription or direct to consumer as, you know, selling from your website or selling from Amazon. But I would go back to the consumer and say, what's that doing for the consumer? What's the case that it will work for the consumer and it will help the consumer? And what's the case that it wouldn't? And that would be my starting point, because if you can't come up with a reason why consumers are going to want whatever you're selling via direct to consumer, there's so many people piling in right now that probably isn't a great place to spend your time. But if there's a really strong case for why your product should be or could be direct to consumer, then, you know, I would say figure out the things you were talking about. What does it look like financially? What does it look like operationally? And don't hesitate to figure out who are the experts or what are the online resources to help you figure it out. And, you know, my learning has been, you can go on YouTube and learn how to remove your own appendix. So, you know, the fact that you don't know how to do it, I wouldn't put that as a stopper for your business. You can learn how to do almost everything for free or for very little money if you're willing to put the time and effort into it. So I would start with what's the consumer case, what's the business case for doing this, and then I would learn the skills either by bringing in somebody to help me or by doing it myself by just learning it online.
And look for resources within the space. You know, we just launched on Amazon, and we did that with the help of the Amazon Launchpad program. And it's a program that's built to be able to provide, you know, additional resources to entrepreneurs and startups, right? Making innovative products available to the millions of consumers who are on Amazon. And so for us, in addition to Amazon's Seller Central University program, we also, you know, have some additional resources available to us to help make that launch more successful. And not saying that that's going to be available to everybody, but look for those types of opportunities, whether it's on Amazon, whether it's in building out your own D2C, and then, you know, just try to get good fast, right? And that's going to be about it.
And I have just one thing to add on that, which is that the beauty of D2C is that you can start small and stay scrappy, test stuff out. If it doesn't work, out. And you can really refine your message over time in a way that is not possible if you're going through grocery. Because, and that's one of the reasons that we love D2C, is because you can just see what messaging resonates with people, what product resonates with people. And if it doesn't, you don't need to even, you can stop doing that tomorrow and you have no regrets over it. So when it comes to D2C, I can't think of anybody, like any reason why a person wouldn't investigate that right now, because it's so, the barrier to entry is so low, the opportunity for return is so high, and consumer interest and preference is changing so fast. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for attending and all of our panelists. You can find more information about Naturally Bay Area at naturallybayarea.org. I have all the panelists' contact information, so if anyone wants to email me or email the email address at Naturally Bay Area, we can funnel questions to them. But thanks again, be safe, and we'll see you next time.